2. Oh, sorry, I didn't even see you there. I don't know if you could hear, but I did over 1,000.
Oh, it's so deep. Ah. Oh, I could barely lift my right arm because I did so many. I don't know if you heard me counting, I did over 1,000.
We're back again with a brand new video. Super excited that we're going to be doing an interview today in Deck Tech with Patrick on his pretty fantastic MH3 Flipwalker Simic Tamiyo, the Inquisitive Student deck. But before we get into all of that and get into introductions, I just want to give a quick introductory shout out to all of the paid tier patrons that are priority holders that have joined. That's Critical EDH, Noise, Busy Baxon, Shane, aka Baphomet. You're all amazing. Thank you for your continued support. We also have a brand new patron, and that would be Koba. So thank you so much, John Koba. You are amazing. I really appreciate the support and for joining as a priority holder. And without anything else from me, let's get back into it. All right, welcome back everyone. I have a super exciting new video that we're gonna be doing today. I have with me a guest, Patrick, also known as Whitesnake on Boxfield and in the RAL Discord and other places. And I'll make sure to shout out all that information in the description of the video. But before we dive into all of that, I just want to go through and have a quick little overview of some recent things that have been going on with the tEDH MTG channel that we have here. If you can, please come check out the Patreon that we have, where videos like this you'll get exclusive early access to before everyone else does on YouTube. And if you like the content and you want to join and support the channel a little bit further, you can become a priority holder, which is one of our first paid tiers that we have available. You'll get shout outs in the beginning of the video, similar to the ones that you already saw. And we also have at a higher tier our split second supporter tier, which actually gives you some pretty awesome perks. So being able to do like live deck techs like this through a Discord call, etc., over a brew that you're interested in and you want some input on, or even doing like coaching sessions on RAL or on other decks. If you want to kind of learn a little bit more about what are the best ways to pilot certain interactions or certain situations and things like that. So all shameless shilling aside from me, as a quick reminder, this is my Moxfield that I have here. This has all the links to the RAL Discord, my Blue Sky, and Patreon links, all that kind of stuff. Also, it'll be in the description of the videos we talked about. And without anything else from me, I want to introduce today Patrick, aka Whitesnake. And I'd love, if possible, for our viewers, if you could just give maybe a little bit of background about like who you are and where you are as it relates to Magic. Like, how long have you been playing? Where'd you start? And what sort of formats did you play? Have you always been in cEDH or Commander, like that kind of thing?
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah.
I've been playing Magic since I was about 11 years old, so we're coming up on 13 years
I
old.
was going to say last year, or?
Yeah, the way I play, you might think so. cEDH for me is a relatively new format.
Yeah.
Only been about 2 years with a few months of off time in between. Okay. So it's really only about 1.5 years of total play time. But I'm really starting to meld with the format and figure things out about it. Learn play patterns and such.
For sure.
It's starting to feel really great. Big fan of the format.
Trying to learn a little bit more about like your Magic history. Like, do you play other formats, or is it just Commander? Or?
I got my start in 60 card, of course, like most people do. Just kitchen table Magic with the neighborhood kids around in my youth.
So it wasn't like you weren't playing like Standard or anything like that? You were just like playing games, jamming the cards you had, that kind of thing?
Pretty much.
So did you, from that point, end up going into like Standard or Pioneer or Pauper, Modern, Legacy, like any of the other Eternal formats, or?
Modern was my first starting point. Back in the day I was playing Bogles, so it was pretty fun. But
cool.
I never really had any big tournament experience or anything there. Just relatively casual Modern.
Did you do like FNMs and stuff? Or?
Yeah, Friday Night Magic's mostly draft though,
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. That's awesome. That just like kind of gives me a little bit more context, and that surprisingly, I mean, we talk a lot and we see each other in the shop all the time. Shout outs to Arcanum Sanctorum, our local game store, which is fantastic. If you're in Arizona, especially in Southern Arizona, please come check it out. If you want to learn more information about it, I'll have it on screen. I'll have it in the description. They're fantastic. Proxy-friendly store as it relates to cEDH. Great draft experiences, as well as they do pre-releases and everything else. But you and I have had an opportunity to kind of play a little bit more there, and also previously at the store we were playing at before that, I didn't really realize what your background was. I kind of just always assumed that, I don't know why I got this assumption that you had played like a huge amount of Popper for some reason. Maybe we just had talked about Popper a few times or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of helpful to give some context. I always find that interesting. Like, where do people come from in Magic? Like, were they trying to go into the Pro Tour and Standard, and then eventually when that dream fizzled out, they made their way into Commander with casual friends, and then all of a sudden, you know, the arms race happened and they made their way into cEDH or whatever. So that's cool. Let me ask you, what is the deck or decks or maybe archetypes or whatever that you kind of started in when you got into cEDH? Like, where did that begin?
I feel like I sort of got my start in cEDH where most people did, or where most uninitiated people do, which was with stacks, because, you know.
That's so, I can completely resonate with that. I was on mono white Heliod, bad Heliod, not the one that combos with Walking Ballista, the garbage one that makes like clerics or whatever. Okay, sorry. When you say that hits home for me. So.
It's where a lot of players, you know, new to the format get their start, because when you're first getting in, it looks like, how do you stop this? You know, this is, how do you get around this? But then, you know, you get dunked on enough times playing stacks and you realize, damn, I kind of just lost us this game.
Yeah.
And you sort of get away from the stacks. I think my first stacks deck, I think was, don't ever play this, but it was Liza Shroud of Dusk. The anti-storm one.
Literally couldn't even tell you what that card does.
It's the anti-storm one from Commander Legends. It's like 5 mana, and it says whenever any player casts a spell, they lose 2 life.
Oof.
Not a great effect.
It
really
doesn't even stop Storm fully either. It just kind of like, it's like the gnat that's like annoying you the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. I did kill a few players with it, but I never won a game. Awful deck. Don't ever play it.
That tracks.
And then I got into, you know, Abzan piles and stuff like that. Timna Kamal was pretty fun.
Oh, actually, I remember you playing that.
Yeah, that was fun.
That actually was cool. Like, you get to do some cool shit in that deck.
Definitely, but then, you know, your Kamal gets removed and it costs, you know, 11 mana. That's pretty rough.
Jesus. Yeah.
And, you know, beating people with a stick is pretty fun in cEDH, but again, not a super game-winning game plan all the time.
Yeah.
So then you sort of, you know, go down, you know, blue and combo lines, and you start to really figure out the format, get a better feel for it, and then you end up making weird decks like this.
Yeah, that's okay. I like the segue too. So you make your way from stacks. You start going down the route of playing like different blue decks. I remember you played TNT for a good amount too.
You played there. Yeah.
You played Blue Farm as well.
Yeah.
And so kind of learning about, for lack of a better term, like the meta, the good decks, right?
Yeah.
And let's kind of, we don't need to bury the lead anymore. Let's talk a little bit more about this super spicy deck and the reason why I wanted to have you on. And thank you again to all the patrons out there that participated in the poll and voted Patrick to come on and to do this deck tech about his baby girl, as he likes to put it.
Baby girl.
And so this is Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student. So I'm gonna read the card for anybody who doesn't know the card, because as we all know, reading the card explains it. So Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student, is one of the Modern Horizons 3 like flip walkers that are a creature on one side, planeswalker on the back, and you have to fulfill some sort of requirement in order to force them to exile and then transform into the backside, similar to Ral or Johnny, etc. 1 blue mana for a 0/3 Moonfolk Wizard, flying, and whenever it attacks, you investigate, which just means you make a clue token, which you can pay 2 mana to crack to draw a card. It's an artifact. Whenever you draw your 3rd card in a turn, and that's any turn, exile Tamiyo, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. So, of note, this does count the card that you draw for turn, which is pretty important. And then once it's flipped, on the backside, you have Tamiyo, Seasoned Scholar. So this is a planeswalker that technically is Simic color identity, very important for why this deck even works at all. And it is a legendary planeswalker Tamiyo, which comes in with 2 loyalty. So the +2 is until your next turn. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets -1/-0 until end of turn. Not usually relevant, but it can be relevant with like Timna attackers and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And then the -3, this is a pretty powerful effect. Return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. If it's a green card, add 1 mana of any color. A lot of times the mana part of that isn't really the reason you're doing it. It's just like a powerful way to buy back an effect that you want back, like a piece of removal or a counter spell before you go off or whatever it is. Or Radstorm. Not to say anyone would play Radstorm in a deck like
Who
this,
would
but
play such a card?
yeah, only absolute psychos. And then the -7 is a big part of the reason why to even play this card. So -7, the ultimate, so to speak, is you draw cards equal to half the number of cards in your library, rounded up, and you get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. So essentially, if you can't win from there, you've constructed the deck wrong. If you draw half your deck in cEDH and you can't win the game, like, what are we doing? I mean, essentially, this is why people play Ad Nauseam, why people play Peer to the Abyss, and cards like that is because they're just like, if they resolve, it's big scary for the table kind of thing. So that's the card. So now I want to ask you a little bit about, like, how did we get kind of started in this conversation, and why Tamiyo? Why did you think it was good? What was interesting? And then we'll start to dive into what did we actually find when we started working on it, and then your playtesting and that kind of stuff.
Definitely. So my only real inspiration for even thinking I could put this deck together was actually your Rad list.
Okay, cool.
I never really saw her as super playable. I had tried to do some tinkering with her in the past, but unfortunately I'm not like the best or most creative brewer. But once I saw you really putting up numbers here in our local meta with Ral, I thought, maybe there is something there. I think we had a conversation at our LGS one day about her, and you actually mentioned you were putting together a list, and then we just got to brainstorming.
Yep.
I had showed you my list, which was, I think I was way too in on the Proliferate stuff. It was just a total jank pile, didn't really work super well.
Okay. And when you say that, if I remember correctly, it was like you were more in on like the one-shot Proliferate effect. So like cantrips that say like draw a card, proliferate, or look at the top 3, put a card in your hand, proliferate. I can't remember the name of those cards, but like some of the cards that actually get played in Pauper Poison Storm and like those kinds of decks. Okay, sorry.
Cards like Serum Snare, really
right. The
suboptimal
removal ones
cards
that also have
that just say proliferate. I'm like, oh, this is proliferate, so it's probably fine.
so I guess, enlighten me, why are those suboptimal? Because when you first say that, I like this idea because then it's like, okay, well, flipping Tamiyo seems easy, right? A single brainstorm does it or whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you had a bunch of like cantrips and proliferate effects, you could get to 7 like relatively easily, and then ultimate, and then you're in this dominating position. What makes those suboptimal, or like why does that matter?
So it's not to necessarily say those cards are bad, but the way that the play pattern that I've come across with Tamiyo is it is significantly more challenging to get her to her ult than it is for example, Ral. Because you have to get her from 2 to 7, and it's not incidental like it is with Ral, where it's just counting your storm. You just have to jam spells and get there. For her, you have to proliferate those counters. So even though you have your 2-mana Serum Snare that gets you a counter on there, that's 1 of 5 you need. So you need way more. You just need to be casting more spells and having too much mana than.
That makes sense. Yeah, I could see that costing a lot of mana and a lot of card like quantity from your hand. Whereas like with Ral, it's like the cantrips and the rituals that I am casting are the cards that once hopefully you win the flip and it flips, but as we know, we don't win flips over here. But if you win the flip, then it flips over, and then it just has that text of it comes in with extra loyalty equal to the spells you cast for turn. So okay, that makes sense. So we started talking, and the idea that you brought to the table and the idea that I brought to the table, we kind of started to meld, like taking the best of both and kind of cutting the worst and like the more garbage cards out of both. And if I remember correctly, a big part of it too was like us trying to make concessions about like, okay, well we've kind of melded these two ideas, and there's some cards that are cool, but we also should just play good cards. It reminds me of like, you can have a synergistic deck and you can have like a cute good deck, but like you still should just be playing like Mystic Roar. You still should just be playing Force of Will. Like these are just good cards inherently, and so the other cards, like the cute card slots, you should have less of them, but each one should be a lot more impactful. I think that's a big part of where we started to come to. So if you're not doing like cantrip and removal proliferate sort of stuff, what did you decide, or like how did we get to the sorts of things that could proliferate? Like what are those cards?
So we really cut like a lot of proliferators. There were some cards that seem good at face value, even like better than our instant or sorcery cantrip proliferators. Like I think Evolution Sage is one that's whenever you have a landfall you proliferate, and that struck me at first as a good card, but really what you want is the super explosive proliferators. I think we're down to 3 in the list. It's we have Dreamtide Whale, which proliferates whenever any player casts their second spell for turn. Notably, it's a 7/5, so it blocks. It's very threatening.
Oh, spicy. And for those who are just listening, or because I know sometimes people like listen to stuff while they're doing other things, so this is a 3 mana 7/5, so it's 2 generic and a blue. It's a whale. It has vanishing too, but as a reminder, those are counters. So and also 2 turns and cEDH is an eternity. But so you can proliferate those off is what I'm getting at. And it says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, proliferate. And what's so notable about that is this has the ledger shredder text. This has the, what do they start calling that? Flurry, I think, in the new set.
So,
Whatever. If there's a keyword for it, I think it's flurry, but if it's not, shoot me in the comments. Basically, what it is any player casting their second spell in any turn will trigger this. So essentially, you could play this card, you play your second spell, it triggers, and then if somebody else wants to counter that spell, they counter it, you counter, they counter back, that's their second spell, it triggers again. And when we go to the next turn, if you cast 2 spells, like 2 counters or whatever, or a cantrip and a counter to flip Tamiyo, it triggers again. So I can see how this card is busted.
It's very strong.
And when this got spoiled, this is also in Modern Horizons 3, for the record. When this card got spoiled, I was like, oh, this card is sick, it's gonna break everything, blah, blah. And it was okay. I tried it in my Dune popcorn bucket, like the Giralf, the Fleshlight. I tried it in that deck because the zombies, have counters on them.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, we can grow the army really quickly. It wasn't quite good enough.
Right.
But I could see here, if your game plan is you're all in on flipping Tamiyo and alting, that's super cool.
Yes.
Is that the whole Proliferate game plan?
Definitely not. That's not quite the main card for proliferating. There's 2 lines I like to sort of assess the game and go down.
Okay.
I'll either say I'm going to grab if I have a creature tutor, I'll grab my Dreamtide Whale because I think this is going to be a longer game that I need to grind out and slowly get my counters up, defend Tamiyo a bit.
Okay.
Or I think I just need to grab my Flux Channeler, get to my turn, explode, and win the game.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's kind of like, for lack of a better term, like your A and B, if you're going in on the proliferate plan with creatures. So would you consider these like proliferate engines, basically? Because like in RAL, you have like Stormkiln Artist or Bergie. Those are my mana engines. Whereas here, you have proliferate engines, where it's like when you're casting spells, or when your opponents are casting spells, they proliferate, right?
Yeah.
So Flux Channeler, again, for the uninformed, 2 mana and a blue, so both of these are 3 mana creatures, which is kind of nice. It's not too expensive. For the low price of a Heuristic Study, you can get a 2/2 human wizard, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. So notably, this is more of like when you are doing the storming, when you are the one who knocks.
I am the one who knocks.
You get to proliferate over and over again on top of your spells. It's a cast trigger, just the way that like Bergie or Stormkiln Artist would be for mana. And I can kind of see what you're saying about how Dreamtide Will lends itself to want to be a bit more of a grindy game plan. That's like a value engine. You slam it, the game is going to play the way the game plays. You're going to pass the turn, whatever, and incidentally, you will just keep proliferating as the game goes on. So before we continue down the rest of these kind of creatures or engines, or talk more about like how you proliferate more, I guess my question would be, and I know the answer, but I'm just curious your thoughts. So we flip Tamiyo, you get to proliferate there. What else in the deck pays you off for proliferating? Because to me that doesn't seem like it's enough.
There are some really solid card selections you have for proliferate. There's also incidental things in our format, notably the One Ring that really, eat well off of proliferate. Our piece of secret tech for proliferate.
No, you can take ownership for this. This is not my green deck. This is your green deck.
is a spicy little card called Pentad Prism.
Oh yeah, the prism.
For 2 generic mana, you have an artifact that enters. It has the Sunburst text, so any color mana you spend to cast it, it sees that, and then it enters with a counter for each color of mana spent to cast it.
Yeah, and it has to be unique, right? So like if you go blue to cast it, that would just come in with 1 counter.
Yeah, so
but if it was like bleen, the main color in cEDH, bleen, also known as Simic. If you go blue-green, then you get 2 counters. And then what else does it do?
Yes, you can remove a counter from it. Notably, it doesn't have to tap or any other interesting, unfortunate little bits of cost there. You just remove a counter to get a mana of any color into your mana pool.
Sick. Okay, I see how you're cooking now. This is hype.
It's pretty solid. With your, oftentimes in this deck, we play a few clones. You have this plus your Flux Channeler or your Dreamtide Whale that's been cloned. You're going positive mana on any spell you cast, almost.
Oh, so now your spells start becoming rituals.
You pretty much have 2 Burgies stapled together, or a Burgie at base.
Yep.
It's very strong, and notably, of course, you don't have to just spend that mana. It's stored. You can use it whenever you want.
Oh, that's so dope. Yeah, and I think what's sick about this does remind me a lot of Pauper Poison Storm, because they do this, like, as they're proliferating off, they're ticking up the storage counters on their lands, which is a thing we don't do here, obviously, that's a little too slow. But the Pentent Prism, for sure, it ticks up. And then there's other artifacts that do similar things, which I'm sure we'll talk about possibly. But that idea is kind of what gives you that, like, takeoff velocity, where you get to a point where it's like, people can't really stop you, because it's a mana ability, it's instant speed, doesn't require you to tap, you have so much flexibility. I mean, we've been in games where you put a Pentent Prism on the stack, and I look at the table and I'm like, this is scary. Like, and it's such an innocuous card. I mean, you look at that and you're like, why should I give a shit about a mana rock?
Mm-hmm.
But it's an unbounded mana rock, and that's what makes it like so spooky, I guess, in this deck.
Definitely.
You know, I was playing when this card came out. I mean, I was around when Fifth Dawn came out, and I just remember this being like, just on its base rate, good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just like good enough as is, even when you're not breaking it with Proliferate and stuff like that. So this is super cool to see this in a list and finally like get a real home and get to do cool shit with it. So okay, you got some mana engine stuff that you get to get paid off for with Proliferate. What else?
Like I said before, the One Ring, unbelievably strong.
Yeah, okay.
I'm trying to think. A recent interaction that I had, a card that I've been iffy on cutting or not cutting has been Polywalk Prodigy.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
there have been games that, you know, I think about cutting the card a bunch, and then I have one game where I have a Polywalk Prodigy, and then with Proliferate you have like a 10-12, and then you're drawing up every non-creature's.
That's actually a really good point. So like, my first thought when you started saying that is, I was like, okay, you proliferate a little bit, but then you get to a certain point where it's like, okay, now you're covering all the cards in the format. Like, once it gets up to like a 5-6 or 5-7 or whatever, then it's like, all right, well, pretty much everything in the format, you're just getting a card off of. Okay, you spent all this time and energy to proliferate a bunch, and you just turned your Polywalk Prodigy essentially into a Mystic Remora or a Risic kind of effect that they can't pay for. But, or like a Nezal, I guess would be a good comparison. But I didn't think about it from the perspective you just said, which is, but that's also its power and toughness.
Right.
So now it's just like big spooky frog. Like, it's like
huge creature.
looking at Glarb like I'm coming to eat your lunch. Like that is sick. Like, I hadn't thought about it from
Absolutely.
that perspective. That's super cool.
Yeah, the counters, it's a really nice little piece of incidental benefit that you get from both Dreamtide Whale and, in this situation, Polywalk Prodigy, where sure, the Proliferate is great and essential to your game plan, but you also just have a massive creature. No Timnas will be swinging at you, no creatures that need to be, any creature with an attack trigger or getting any benefit from attacking is not going to be coming at your 7-5 or your 10-12 Polywalk Prodigy.
Yeah, and Tim is all over the format right now too. So and like getting in with attacks and stuff, I mean, that's important. I can see Walking Ballista kind of doing a similar impression there, where like you just slam like a X is 1, a 2-mana Walking Ballista, and then cast one more spell with your Flux Channeler out, and you're essentially getting 2 mana's worth of value, because now it's like your Walking Ballista goes up 1, so now it was like almost kind of like X was 2, so like a 4-mana Walking Ballista, and then every 1 up that, the Walking Ballista just grows. It's a huge beater that can also instant speed be removal, or possibly be a win condition if you keep going.
It tends to be if you're...
Yeah, because you just have an infinite mana dump or whatever.
Of course.
Oh, that's right. So with the One Ring, it probably won't come up a lot, but I could see it almost being a weird deterrent for the One Ring when someone else plays a One Ring. First of all, you just get to copy it, and the One Ring is busted in this deck because you can proliferate, right? It's not quite as powerful as it is maybe in Derevi because the untaps are so nuts,
right?
But it's still pretty good. Like, you still get to do the Simic stuff, which is nuts, and then also proliferate the One Ring. But what I'm thinking about is the inverse interaction, where someone else has a One Ring, they go to draw a card, and you go around the turn cycle, and maybe they're at like a lower life total. Let's say even if they're at like 15, you could just proliferate their One Ring up to 15 past the turn, and they just die to the trigger. I mean, sure, they have an opportunity to respond in the upkeep or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of hot. Oh, I could also see you ticking up other people's Mystic Remoras. Oh my god, I hadn't even thought about that.
There's a lot of great
cumulative upkeep, what are they called? They're like, are they time
counters? I think it's a time counter, or an age counter, I think, or something like that.
What is it? Oh, it is. an age counter. That's weird. I hadn't really ever thought about that. Okay.
There's tons of neat little bits of interactions you get from just proliferating, because there's little things like that in our format that have counters that you don't typically think about.
Holy shit, Urza Saga 2?
Mm-hmm.
Ticking up our own Urza Saga to like instant speed, tutor out a 0 or 1 mana card from the deck. We did talk about this. It's
very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
It's
god,
very strong.
and you're a crop rot deck, right?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Oh, so you can crop rotation, instant speed into an Urza Saga, tick it up, and that means you have an instant speed line to be able to get any 0 or 1 mana artifact out of your deck. Dude, that's so hot. That is so hot. So you could just instant speed, make a crop rot turn into a mana vault, or what other cool stuff do you have in here? It's mostly mana, right? Like so it's just like all the different colored mana and then like mana vault, soul ring. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had that interaction actually come up in one of our games at our last monthly tournament, where I won at instant speed on another player's turn because I had a Valley Flood color in play.
Okay.
I had a Banishing Knack in hand, but I didn't have my 0-drop rock. So I crop rotationed for Urza's Saga.
Oh, dude, you're the Muppet.
Yes.
You're the chef. You're the Swedish chef from the Muppets. You're just out here, like you're just cooking on people, dude. Oh, that's so sick.
It was pretty funky.
Sorry, I'm getting hyped on this now.
It was pretty funky.
Yeah.
I instant speed crop rotated into the Urza Saga and then forced it all the way up. Found my Mox Opal and then presented infinite mana.
Got to go off from there.
Yeah.
Damn, that's so hot. Okay, that makes total sense. And I guess the other one that I wanted to point out as it related to ticking up counters. Oh, the main one is poison.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk.
Incidental.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No big deal. We don't need to worry about that.
No.
All right. So let's talk about the two main ways that you have to give poison in the deck. So you've got the kind of what some people call like the bird flu line or whatever. So that's Infectious Bite, right? So it's an instant that is 2 mana. So it's a generic and a green. Yeah. And it says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Each opponent gets a poison counter. And notably, this gets around the 1 ring, right? So it's not targeting. And it's an instant, which is super sick. Also, you have Prologue to Phyresis. So 1 generic and a blue, so 2 mana instant. And it says each opponent just gets a poison counter, draw a card. So this one's a cantrip, the other one is a pseudo removal spell in a way. And what is it that, I have so many questions about this, but I guess the main thing I would ask is like, is this game plan good enough? Why are you only playing 2 of this effect if that's the case? Like, are there other versions of this effect that are playable in these colors? Why aren't you on them? And then also like, aren't these like just must-answer spells in the deck? Like, how do people threat assess this in the deck? Because they don't say you win the game, right? Speaking of which, all of the people at home, you've lost the game. But if you put an Infectious Bite on the stack, and I'm in route, for example, and I have Counterspell in hand, I'm not countering that card.
Of course not. Yeah.
But what becomes scary then, I guess, is like, well, what is this person gonna do with that? It's like this weird like time bomb kind of that you can't get rid of.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had this conversation come up with players on our local meta, especially Dan. Dan is terrified of Infectious Bite and of Prologue to Phyresis.
Yeah.
It goes on the stack, he says, you all need to counter this or we're gonna die in a few turns.
Yeah, which is interesting, because like, how do you evaluate in a few turns? Like, what if you just don't get to the next turn,
That's
and
the
then you
thing.
gotta go to
Yeah.
the turbo play, you go to me and I'm on Ral,
Mhm.
and someone used their counterspell on that? Okay, sorry, go ahead. I'm
You're
getting
good.
excited
No,
about this
it
deck
is-
now.
It's funky because it really creates an interesting sort of like counter this or possibly die sort of interaction, which is both good and bad, because there's massive upside, of course, because it could win you the game.
Sure.
But downside is it could just eat a counter spell and then open up another player for winning.
Okay.
More often than not, you just win the game because
Right.
they'll say it's just one poison counter, doesn't matter, and then
And I love cards like that when brewers are building a deck that are kind of like, you know how powerful they are.
Mhm.
Other people who maybe have lost to it enough eventually evaluate how powerful they are.
Mhm.
But trying to convince an entire pod that they're that powerful when it's a shitty common from Phyrexia All Will Be One that doesn't actually this moment represent a win is such a weird dynamic. I mean, it's not exactly, but it's kind of like the thought process that me and the other people that are in the RAL server have really been trying to tune that deck to make it where it's like, they're just a bunch of cantrips and they're a bunch of rituals. Like, okay, great. What are you're gonna counter Rite of Flame? Awesome. Here's a desperate ritual. Oh, you're gonna counter Highway Robbery? Okay, cool. Here's a Git Probe. Like, these are just little cantrips, just card draw, whatever. So it makes trying to find the point of interaction very difficult to assess. And I think if you can screw up a pod's threat assessment in a way that benefits you, that's one of the few times where I think Brewer's advantage is a long-term plan. So what I mean by that is any given Sunday effect happens with Brewer's advantage, right? Let's say no one has ever heard of RAL like they used to back when I was first playing it, and I could just show up and mop a table or mop a tournament or whatever.
As you do.
And that's like because they're just not aware. But that only works for so long. Then you've got somebody like Blakey, shout out in the Discord, who took down the Orlando Cool Stuff Con on RAL, and now there's all this attention on it, and Lamore's Cards is talking about it, and Play to Win did a little spot on it or whatever, and now you've got eyes of the whole community starting to look at a deck. You still have Brewer's advantage, but you don't really have as much anymore.
Right.
So now the question becomes, what's your long-term plan for beating those pregame discussions, for beating people who understand that Prolactite Favoresis is a pivotal linchpin moment in the game? And I think this is a way to beat that, which is, it's so hard to convince someone to use their precious interaction on this when it's not a win right now.
Absolutely.
It's almost the reason why you kind of shouldn't mental misstep the Mystic Remora. It's like, yeah, we all know that's broken and it's going to draw a bunch of cards, but the game plan of the game is you're probably going to draw a bunch of cards too, and it doesn't represent a win right now. Now, if it's a Silence on the stack, or a Demonic Consultation on the stack, or maybe a Vamp Tutor or something like that in the upkeep, those then all of a sudden, it's like, maybe I should use my mental misstep. So I know I just kind of went off on a tangent there, but like to me, that is a very important part of assessing whether or not a brew has staying power. And that's one of the things that I see about this deck and the way that you've been tuning it, is that there is a pretty powerful amount of longevity that exists, which even when people fundamentally understand the deck, they've played it themselves, they have seen a bunch of people win with it or whatever, you can still just win the game through all of that.
Absolutely. Yes.
And the main thing I'd love to talk about is one of the ways to do that is through the Storm interaction, right? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So that's building off of what you said. It actually isn't as much of a linchpin for the deck. The
interesting. Okay.
Phoresis over Infectious Bite is, sure, like you can counter this if it's that threatening to you. I have other ways to win the game.
Yeah.
This isn't my main line for winning. This deck is very flexible, especially with her in the command zone. You draw half your deck, you're just winning the game 8 ways to Sunday at that point, you know?
Okay. So what, like, and I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way, like you draw a bunch of cards, that makes you win the game. Like, what are the actual literal ways to win the game? Like, you're probably not winning through combat damage unless somehow you get this really crazy board state with a Polywhite Prodigy and a Dreamtide Whale and you swing it or whatever.
It's possible.
Let's talk about the reality of it. Poison is one way.
Yes.
What else is there?
You have Poison plus Radstorm, as you said, or you have...
And I'm sorry, before we breeze past that, just to be super clear, Radstorm we haven't talked about
absolutely.
yet. So this is a 4-mana instant with Storm that just says Proliferate. So as you can imagine, this is super busted. The only way to counter this spell is likely a Flusterstorm or a Mindbreak Trap. Like, you kind of aren't countering this spell, and that's why cards like Brain Freeze, Grapeshot, Radstorm, Flusterstorm, stuff like that are so powerful, is because of the Storm mechanic. Also, it's an instant. So basically, if you want to think about it like this, if someone else is trying to go off on the stack, and you have already given the table poison, or you give them poison at instant speed, you can go, and then when it seems like everybody has used the majority of their interaction or the Mindbreak Traps or whatever, you can just put a Radstorm on top, Storm is a billion, the table just dies.
Yep.
Like, unless they try to win on top of your Storm triggers, there's not really a whole lot of outs other than, like we talked about, Mindbreak Trap, Flusterstorm, or whatever. So anyway, so you're saying Poison plus Radstorm, what else are we working with?
We have a few different ways to go infinite mana in this deck, actually more than a few. We're playing, your classic line of Devoted Druid Machine Gods.
Right. Okay, yeah, so we have Devoted Druid here. I think most people know this combo, but essentially, if you Machine God Effigy copying a Devoted Druid, the Machine God Effigy is notably just an artifact. It's not an artifact creature. And so you can tap it for green or blue, because Machine God Effigy itself taps for blue, and then Devoted Druid copy of it gives it the tap for green. And then also gives it that ability to put -1/-1 counters on it to untap it. So you can tap on tap, and it gets all these -1/-1 counters, but it's an artifact, so
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. So sorry, go ahead. So you have an infinite mana there.
There's actually more infinite, there's a few ways to make infinite mana in this deck. We have emet-selch, of course, another classic line.
Classic.
Yeah. It's been around longer than I've been alive, it feels.
Yeah.
We have our Hullbreaker plus our mana positive rocks.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that notably will win the game if players have a poison counter and you have your flux channeler in play. You don't even need to do anything else. You just bounce your rocks a bunch of times.
Oh, right. Yeah, you don't need a red storm.
Yeah.
You can kind of build your own red storm by...
Even if you don't have a way to draw your deck, or if you can't cast your Tamiyo or whatever, or you don't have your super large payoff, if you have a Proliferator in play, plus your infinite line of Hullbreaker mana positive rocks, the Proliferate will kill the other players.
Right. Okay, so but to be clear, that's still poison as the win
Yes,
condition.
it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just sort of an incidental way to get there.
Sure. Yeah.
Just another way to get there. And of course, with infinite mana, we have Walking Ball, which just
Gotcha.
shoots
Okay, that makes total sense. And I breezed past it earlier because I was getting excited about it just being good with Proliferate.
Which is great.
Which is great, but it's also an infinite mana outlet.
Yes.
You have Thrasos as an infinite mana outlet, but that doesn't win you the game because you're not on Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, that's sort of in a pinch,
Yeah, and you don't have any way to take a Thoracle out of somebody else's deck. You could obviously copy one if it was on board, but that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it could, but...
Nightmare scenario.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's Walking Ballista and Poison are the two, real, actual ways.
Those are the lines I'll be going for, yeah.
Okay, then there's no other out that I see here.
Not that I can think of, no.
And there doesn't need to be clear.
Yeah.
I think that's plenty, especially because there's two poison effects, Walking Ballista, plus you have, because of the colors that you're in, a way to buy back the poison effects as well.
Yep.
And Tamiyo itself has a way to buy
She does
that,
that, yeah.
which is super cool.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I think that gives kind of the people at home a good way to imagine the game plans and how you're going to win. Why don't you walk me through a little bit about why is it that you are playing cards like, for example, War of Invention, or dramatic reversal, stuff like that, like cards that seemingly are powerful, but what are they for, I guess?
So dramatic reversal is another thing I forgot to mention. That is also an infinite mana line with Kitsa, Otterball Elite in our deck.
Right. Yeah. Kitsa's so busted. I feel like everybody slept on that card when it was first spoiled. People thought it'd be cool in the command zone or whatever. Dude, that card's just good.
It's really, really strong.
Yeah. So dramatic reversal, 2-minute instant, untap all non-land permanents.
Assuming you have your rocks.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just another way to make infinite mana. There's more ways than I can think of to make infinite mana in this deck.
Yeah, and so you just with the reversal on the stack, you use that second ability on kids, assuming that it doesn't have summoning sickness or whatever. You pay to tap copy target instant or sorcery spell you control, and you do this, and then it puts another copy of the reversal on the stack. That one resolves, untapping the Kitsa, and you just leave the original on the stack, and you just keep copying it, making infinite mana, assuming you have any rock on board or whatever, or even a mana dork or whatever.
Or your One Ring. I'll also get to there. Yep.
Oh, that's so hot! I love that.
Yep, that's one way to do it. It's very difficult to interact with line, especially if you're in a big stack.
So what's the War of Invention for then?
War of Invention is sort of a flex slot. I'm actually not as high on the card as I was when I first picked it up.
Okay.
I'm really on it right now as it gives your clues extra utility because you're not always, clues are 2 mana to crack unless we grab another card I forgot to mention, our Forensic Gadgeteer.
Go Gadget. Oh, I love this card. I want to see more decks playing this card. I just think it's so cool.
It's very strong.
It's very fun.
Also goes infinite with Basalt Monolith, of course.
Oh, right, yeah, this does the Kinnan thing. Oh, yeah. Okay, so to just be super clear, War of Invention is the 3 blue pip, X, and you can improvise, meaning you can tap artifacts to pay for the generic mana cost.
Yes.
And it says search your library, and it's an instant. Search your library for any artifact where its mana cost is X, put it on the battlefield. So that's just instant speed, tutor directly to the field in blue, which is pretty cool. And then Forensic Gadgeteer here is a 3 mana for the low price of a Heuristic Study, as a reminder. It's a 2/3 Vidalcan Artificer Detective. All very relevant creature types. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate. So it's a cast trigger, which is kind of nice. But then the real important part is activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate. This effect can't reduce it to below 1, essentially. So this, again, does the kind of similar thing that Kinnan does with the Basalt. And also just makes all your clues cost 1 to
Which
crack.
is super great. That's oftentimes if I'm mulling any lower than, 6, if I see this card in my hand with, lands and enough to cast it or whatnot, I'll keep it just because that cracking your clues for one is a really great way to come back from a, you know, sort of a rough hand. Because something I look at Tamiyo as in the command zone, other than being, you know, win con if you flip her and ult her,
Right.
she can draw you out of a bad hand. It's not quite as good as, you know, a Timna, you know, a very reliable way to draw
No, I
cards.
see what you're saying, yeah, because you just attack each turn, and it's an attack trigger, and it gets you a clue.
Yeah,
like,
she will draw you cards if you, you know, if you're if that's what it takes.
catch up
you know?
mechanic. That's
Yeah.
really nice. I always like, when I'm assessing cards like this, I'm always thinking about like, what's the busted, broken thing you can do? Like, brr, you know?
Yeah.
But it's a good reminder that like, the color pairing that you're in doesn't necessarily lead you to want to play like that.
Yeah.
And that's just a play style I find fun. Like, I want to storm, I want to turbo off, I want to combo, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that's the most viable or the way to win games. In fact, a lot of times it isn't. And so this is super cool in this mid-range hell that we're in, to be able to just like grind clues every turn, choose not to flip her, or if you do flip her, you get to just tick up turn after turn and then start rebuying instants out of the yard, like, or be threatening an ultimate or whatever. Like, that's, I like that it kind of, it gives you that pseudo Timna sort of style.
That's another thing I really love about this deck that you just mentioned is Tamiyo is both your win con in the command zone, you know, with the ult, or she can really grind out the game. If you're, you know, just incidentally proliferating on her flip side, she'll be buying you back your interaction, your bounce spells and such from the bin, which is just very strong, you know, every turn. And, you know, of course, those clues are very relevant with your Whir of Invention, your improvised cost. She just has that sort of dynamic sort of game plan where you can flip her and try to win immediately, or you can flip her and sort of dirtle and let the mid-range thing do the mid-range thing, you know?
So, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And you know, I keep making these comparisons to Rao because it's the deck that I'm the most focused on right now. And it's the one that I'm interested in, just seeing how it kind of plays in the meta. What's I think so powerful about Ral is the front side is mana advantage, the back side is your win condition. And here, what's so interesting is you're in Simic colors, so you're not as interested about mana advantage because you have mana dorks, you have all these other powerful
Super
things.
incidental in these colors.
So the front side is card advantage and grind power, and the back side is the possibility of a little more grind and then a win condition and drawing half your deck. So I kind of like that we're kind of just flipping that like it's almost like a pivot from, instead of having to deal with the added mana with Ral, you get the added card draw in Tamiyo. And also notably, it's 1 mana.
Yeah.
So if it dies or gets countered, you can recast it for 3 mana and it's not that big of a deal.
And then it really is a Timna.
Right, yeah, exactly. You probably don't love recasting it at 5 mana, but it's not the end of the world.
I will never do that.
Okay, all right, well, you heard it here, folks. If you're playing in a game and Tamiyo costs 5, even if he's able to, he will never do it.
Even with infinite mana, I would never do
Never,
that.
never do it, yeah.
It's not something I would never do, but it is feels bad.
Yeah, for sure. So in that mid-range grind plan, we've already talked about cards like Dreamtime Whale, we talked about Forensic Gadgeteer and things like that as being kind of like this sort of pseudo-grindy plan or whatever. But I see you have some clones in the deck, and then also you have mid-range cards like Fairy Mastermind, and then we start getting up into the big dogs like Clever Impersonator, which I think is an amazing medical right now, especially because you're in green, because you can tutor it off your green tutors, the creature tutors. And then you're running Consecrated Sphinx, bro. Like, you're just laying it on the table.
Absolutely.
And big shout out to the Denver meta. And, you know, I think they would be proud. All the people over at the Critical EDH would love to see that you're jamming a Consecrated Sphinx in this deck. I mean, if your deck isn't winning enough, there's one simple solution. You just put a Consecrated Sphinx in it and hope for the best. You know?
Yeah, super great card.
So you have these mid-range, you know, Polywalk Prodigy as well, and also you have, of course, a Flash Enabler and Valley Flood Caller, which notably we get to do kind of bonkers stuff with Banishing Max.
Yes.
Yeah. So here it is, Banishing Max. So it's a single blue for an instant until in a turn, the target creature gains return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And so because it untaps every time that you cast a non-land permanent, you get to create this loop of casting non-land permanents, bouncing back these like mana positive rocks and just kind of going off. You basically build your own Hullbreaker loop.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you have these mid-range plan cards, you have some clones, so it really does look like you have a strong way to be able to grind through the mid-range hell. Oh, and you know what I just realized we totally didn't talk about, which is actually your 4th win condition, Finale of Devastation.
Oh, of course.
You can just infinite Finale.
Yes.
And I have the advantage of looking at your deck list while
yeah.
you don't. You're just going from memory, so kudos to you. So I guess The only other cards that I think I want to really touch on that are interesting to me, that are, I mean, obviously a lot of these cards are cool and interesting. Frantic Search is interesting, Misdirects. These are cool cards, but I think the audience at home gets why you'd be playing them in a deck like this.
Right.
The ones that I think are maybe not as straightforward or not as clear are cards like Archdruid's Charm, and there was another one and Brainstorm. I know why you're playing Brainstorm, but like that's not a cEDH card. So first of all, why are we playing Brainstorm?
Brainstorm represents, at least for me, an instant speed Tamiyo flip. Something that is surprisingly common is players will ask to read Tamiyo before the game, see that she draws you half your deck on her flip side, and assume that that is something you're going to be like slamming on turn 2 or 3. There's a real misevaluation of her, so she gets spot removed with no flip on the stack more times than you'd expect.
Interesting. So that's kind of like the flip side of Brew's Advantage, where it's like people don't know what your commander does, so they're like, scary commander is scary, Swords to Plowshares. Like,
put it in the ground.
Okay.
There's also, just fun spike plays and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I had her bolted before. It is two things really. Brainstorm is your instant speed flip, Tamiyo flip, which can be both defensive or the end of the player before you use turn, you cast your Brainstorm. If nothing gets done about it, you have your flip Tamiyo on your turn. You can pop off from there or do your mid-range thing.
I could even see on top of a big stack that ends, that the whole table like stops a player from nosing or whatever, and they're about to go to the next turn. You could Brainstorm and then Radstorm on top of it, going to your turn with a Tamiyo ready to ult. And the table's out of interaction because you just talked through how to stop the Nause player or whatever. So there's lots of cool interactions with that card. It's interesting.
Absolutely. Another really nice strength of this deck that I had not really mentioned before is that mid-range plan. I have, or at least in my experience, I'll come out on top of it most of the time if I flip her. Because with my Dreamtide Whales, typically I'll copy it or something. If I have more than one Proliferator in play and Tamiyo flips and I'm doing her sort of dirtling mid-range thing, if there's a big enough turn cycle before I come back, I'll have enough counters on her to just ult right then. It is sort of incidental.
It's kind of like you're just doing what the format wants to do anyways, which is like cast multiple spells in a turn for Dreamtide Well, for example. And I can totally see how that's like just almost like a way to do a scary thing that isn't scary up front.
Yes.
Like, it will eventually be scary if the table decides to cast a bunch of spells that they could choose not to. I feel like giving players a choice that will always benefit you is another really powerful way to like push your brew forward and come out on top. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's another really nice thing about those whales is a lot of players will not play into them. They say, oh, there's a Dreamtide Whale in play with a flip Tamiyo. I'm not going to cast more than 2 spells. That's great. Don't forward your game plan. I'll cast spells and I'll proliferate her up.
Yeah, so it's almost like a stacks piece, or it can be kind of
stacks.
Yeah,
because it's just a dissuasion.
Yeah, it's like a deterrent kind of.
Yeah.
So that's interesting about Brainstorm. So to get back over to Archdruid's Charm, so this is one that I don't always remember exactly what it does because it's green, and it's an instant that is green, green, green. So 3 mana, choose one, and there's 3 modes. Search your library for a creature or land card and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield, tapped if it's a land, otherwise put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. I literally forgot that this is a mode on this card. And then the third mode, exile target artifact or enchantment. So what's this about?
So it's very useful.
Is it just utility though?
It can be both utility and another thing that we really surprisingly kind of struggle for is consistency with our creature tutors.
Oh, okay.
So it can represent just, oh, I'll slam this, grab a Kitsa, or I'll grab my Flux Channeler or whatnot.
Gotcha.
It also represents your removal, if you need to put a counter on something and kill something.
Dude, it's super flexible.
Yeah,
Holy cow.
surprisingly strong.
Do you get lands a lot? I mean, I can see you getting Urza Saga, I guess.
Occasionally, it's usually, a face-up Kitsa or a face-up
Are you
Flux
in
Channeler.
Cradle? I can't remember.
We are in Cradle. Yes.
Okay, so you could go that route too. Like,
Yes.
I'm just trying to think, like, are there lands that are worth getting? And I guess it's just, it's really just
Village too. Is a
oh,
new hit. Yep.
oh my gosh, yeah, just getting Mysterized Village and then being able to go off on your turn.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go
No,
ahead.
you're good, buddy. And then that last mode is, the exiling target artifact or enchantment. Unfortunately, kind of not super relevant because, feels really bad to spend 3 green pips,
Sure.
which we're not super heavy on in this deck.
Exiling the One Ring though is real.
That's really the only thing it's
Yeah.
for, you know.
Or I could even see exiling like I guess like a Blood Moon effect.
Yeah.
A really rough stacks piece, like maybe you have a bunch of those green to the battlefield tutors and you want to get rid of like a Graph Digger's Cage, that way they can actually come into play. Or maybe like you don't really get hit by a lot of stack stuff because you don't technically have to storm off. Like you could do the eventuality plan. So, but I mean it's still removal. Like you get to remove creatures with this if you want to, and you get to remove artifacts and enchantments if you want to. So there's not really a whole lot of creature type or card types left to deal with.
Yeah, it deals with a lot of things. It's mostly a face-up creature tutor with that incidental bit of, you know, a couple pieces of removal there. It's flexible, which is what I like about it. It's a card I'm sort of iffy on. Those 3 green pips are really rough as a casting cost.
Yeah, I can see that being one of those cards that's like close to the chopping block. Like if there's something else that gets printed that's better. It fits so many roles that I can see it being a real role player in the deck. Like that makes sense. It shores up your removal. It does. Okay, that makes sense. So I want to touch on like 1 or 2 more cards, and then I want to wrap up. So let's talk about Ichor Gauntlet. That's one that when I read that card, I'm like, bruh, like, bruh, like this is such a sick card. Okay, so it's again for the low cost of heuristic study or unstable harmonics, if you will. It's 2 generic and a blue for an artifact. So this is actually a colored artifact that's blue. It says planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate, and they also have -12. Take an extra turn after this one. So I guess technically this is also a win condition if you get like you could take infinite turns and then just beat down with creatures. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But whenever it also has whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent. Put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent.
Yes.
So when I read this, I'm like, is this card good enough?
Surprisingly, yes.
Okay.
I was also pretty low on it. It was not in the original build of this deck, but it does fit that same sort of Dreamtide Whale and Flux Channeler slot, where if you can
Like the Proliferate
this,
engine slot, basically.
Yeah, if you can resolve this, notably it doesn't proliferate. You have to choose a counter on specifically a permanent. So it's really just to get your counters up on Tamiyo.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you can't use this to win with poison.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's not, you know, the best of the 3. It's actually probably the worst of the 3, but notably you can find it with that Whir of Invention. And
that's cool.
It's not legendary for whatever reason, even though it looks like it would be.
Oh my god.
You can copy it with Phyrexian Metamorph or Clever Impersonator, and then copying your Proliferate is very strong in this deck.
Wow. Oh, that's super cool. I love that. And what's interesting too is it doesn't specify a permanent you control.
Yes.
So that means you could do like weird shenanigans with other people's like Urza Saga or other people's like Devoted Druid. You could like kill it at instant speed in response to something. I mean, there's weird stuff. I don't even know if that would come up, but like, okay, that's interesting.
It's just niche little interactions. Proliferate again, or in that case, pseudo proliferate is surprisingly has its uses in our format. There was a game notably recently that I played that I had. I'm trying to remember the exact situation. I think there was a problematic stacks piece in play, and I had infinite casts, so I had my infinite proliferate, but I couldn't actually win from there for whatever reason. But a player had a 1 ring in play, so I just killed it. So I proliferated all of his counters, and then he had 1,000 counters on it or whatever, and he can't even tap it to draw in his upkeep to try to win because
that
then
would just kill him. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I like that. That's actually super cool.
Yeah.
I also like that there's like this weird backdoor situation where like that can come up. You've already maybe activated your Tamiyo for a turn or whatever, but you can like kill your own Tamiyo, or you can like find a way to maybe bounce your own Tamiyo, replay it, and get yourself into a situation where ulting, using Ichor Gauntlet's ult to just take an extra turn and try to go again. Yeah. Although, how is Tamiyo worded? Is it the 3rd spell you draw for turn, or is it the third?
It's the 3rd card you draw in a turn.
Okay, so you can't flip her twice in a turn.
No, you cannot.
Okay, never mind. Sorry. Yeah, I guess I was cooking a little too much.
That
there,
is
but-
a notable weakness of this deck, is
Okay.
that if you are, playing against me or any of the other 0 people that are playing this deck,
Hell yeah.
it is not a May, like Rao. If you draw your 3rd card in a turn, she flips. So you can sort of abuse that by
Like
forcing me to
forcing-
draw.
yeah.
Yeah, if I'm in a threatening position, you can force her to flip. And then, just she starts with 2 loyalty. A 10
Pretty
that
easy
kills
to
her.
kill. Yeah,
Very
yeah.
easy to kill.
Oh, okay.
That's a notable weakness of this deck, is that it is not a May, like Rao.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess real quick here, I see a bunch more mid-range hell sort of cards like the Mirror Maid, the Copy Artifact. Sylvan Library seems super powerful as well because that's another way to just flip Tamiyo, like force flip, because it does technically draw you 2 more cards.
Yes, it does.
And then you got some cool additional like mana outlets of Carpet of Flowers and then like Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth as ways to like have like mana ramp that doesn't get killed by Bowmasters and removal and stuff. So that's kind of cool. Plus they also trigger your Proliferate effects for non-creature spells, which I like. That way they're not dead draws later in the game. And I'm looking here, I guess, at the mana base and some of the notable. I mean, you're on fetches obviously, and you're on duels. You're on the Surveil Land and Hedge Maze. You are on 2 basics, a forest and an island. And then I see that you've got, the good cards like Otawara Beseiju, you have Ancient Tomb, you do have Manamo, which is super spicy with the 1 ring, but also untaps your Kitsa.
Yes.
And
It can do weird little things, like,
Yeah.
those are really the
you
only
can
2
untap your
strong
Gaia's
uses.
Cradle with it too.
You can untap your Cradle, you can also untap Tamiyo to have a 0/3 blocker.
Sure,
If you ever need it.
yeah.
It's nichely useful, but
That makes sense. We also talked about too how you're on Urza's Saga, the Mistrise Village,
Yes, of course.
Cavern of Souls. I assume you just put it on Wizard.
You just put it on Wizard, yeah. Notably, of course, that'll make a surprising number of creatures in this deck are wizards for whatever reason.
Oh right, yeah,
Flux
you're on
Channeler
step
is a wizard.
through as an
Yes.
uncounterable ability, instant speed, 2 mana wizard
Yes.
tutor.
Yes.
Oh, that's cool.
Because, our big hitter Flux Channeler, which is absolutely the card you look out for in this deck
Yeah.
if you're playing against it, you kill that creature. You kill that creature on site,
Sure.
or you counter it on the stack.
Yeah,
and
there
it is
are a
wizard.
lot of wizards.
Yeah.
Wait, so you have Valley Flood Caller, Polywog Prodigy, Kitsa, you have Flux Channeler, Thrasios, and the Commander.
Yep, all
So,
wizards.
I like Spellskite too. That's another thing you can whir at instant speed in response to removal.
Yes.
That's kind of cool. Nice. Okay. Yeah, that's super sick. Sorry, I'm just like so geeked out about this deck. I love it. So I guess as a way to wrap up here, because we got a couple minutes left, I'd like to know what do you see as like why would you play this deck over other blue-green pairing? And then I guess a follow-up is like how is it positioned in your opinion in the meta?
Definitely.
Briefly.
I don't think this deck is, I'm not going to sit here and kid myself and say it's like a top 10 or 20 deck in the format.
It's no
but
kidding
it's-
necessarily.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Okay.
if you
it's no
wanna
solo
play-
Thrasios. is what
Of
you're
course,
saying.
of course. It's the best deck in the format.
Obviously.
If you want to play a Simic pile, I'd
Yeah.
say just play Kinnet,
Right.
But this is enjoyable and it's very, it is strong in what it wants to do.
Sure.
But it's not, this isn't, a nightmare deck to play against. It's not
Yeah.
you sit down across from Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student, and you say, dang, I gotta play against this deck,
Right, yeah,
But
yeah.
it is, powerful in its own way. And
It seems like it's pretty quick too, like at least
Oh, yeah.
quick to get started, like because you have a 1 mana commander.
Yes,
like the
absolutely.
ability to just have Box Amber turned on turn 1, or to have like Fierce turned on turn 1, like these are real
Yes,
things.
absolutely.
So I mean that's not nothing.
Yeah.
So it's just pretty cool.
Yeah.
So how do you see it as it's positioned in the meta? Like as far as like what are the decks you want to sit down against, and what are the sorts of decks that you don't?
yeah, this deck absolutely wants to see the game go long. So sitting down with decks like Kinnan, TNT, it's great, because I
Yeah.
know that eventually there will be, like I mentioned before, you mentioned that eventuality of this deck, where, I've had games where, it is sort of a mid-range hell where past time, there's a big stack, everybody has a poison counter, I draw my Radstorm, everybody just dies,
Yeah.
It's kind of sneaky like that in that way.
Yeah.
It really thrives in that mid-range sort of space.
It's a sense of finality where you're like, and do you have this answer? Like, and if they don't,
Absolutely.
they're just cooked. Like,
Yeah.
and you get to just sit back and know it's coming, and you're waiting for everyone to use every piece of interaction until the very last second. I like that approach. That's kind of cool, and that plays into the whole flash kind of flash speed meta
Yes.
that we're at right now.
Absolutely. Decks I don't want to sit down across from are really fast decks, sort of like
So
Ral.
the hyper turbo, the rock size, the Rals.
Yeah, because this deck is really comfortable in the mid-range space. I think it's sort of, you know, with your eventuality in Radstorm, you sort of flip that space into your advantage. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because lots of games end in that way, and this just totally takes advantage of that.
That makes sense.
Specifically with Radstorm.
So how are you against stacks? I mean, I know it's not a huge archetype right now, but I feel like you would be decent. I mean,
Stacks is a little rough. Always makes me regret not playing Cyclonic Rift. It can be a little hard to perform under, but it's not impossible. You know.
You have a decent amount of removal. I mean, you don't have a huge amount, but like you do get secret removal in your mana base with like Otawara Beseju, Sink into Stupor, stuff like that, and then you have some amount of removal
Yeah,
in the
we
deck.
play
I mean,
Floodmaw and some other bouncers, I believe. There's that Archdruid's Charm as well that can take
Okay,
out a
yeah,
Stony
yeah.
Silence or whatnot.
I see these. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The deck particularly, and I think a lot of, it's not specific to my deck, but decks like Tamiyo or Cannon or TNT that are mid-range decks that want to see the game go long have issues with Ral and Rogsai, not because they're like, you know, super hard to win against, or maybe, you know, they kind of can be in your case.
Well, no, I mean, but like, yeah, if you have enough resources, they aren't that hard. Like,
Yeah.
it's a pretty linear game plan, right?
Yes, the thing though is you sort of have to warp your game plan around the turbo deck, you know? You have to have that pregame conversation of what are we keeping for Ral? Like, maybe I'm sitting across from you and you're playing your wonderful little deck that scares me every time.
So little.
And I'm looking at a good hand, but I don't have any answers for what you're trying to do. I'm like, I don't know if I can keep this, you know?
Oh, I
'Cause
see what you're
have
saying.
to-
Like, yeah, like your mulligans all of a sudden start getting super warped
Yeah.
by the fact that like maybe you have a proactive game plan
Yeah, but
that
you'll-
copies things and whatever, but like
Yeah.
you're just gonna maybe you don't know if you will, but maybe you're just gonna lose to me on turn 1 or 2, and so you have
That's
to be.
the thing, you know. That's exactly, you worded it perfectly. It's, sure, I have this perfect hand, I have my rocks, my flux channel, or whatever I need, but I know that my deck will not win as fast as yours every single time. So I sort of have to be like, I don't know if I can keep this, I need a Fierce, I need a Flusterstorm, I need something to handle that, and then I can figure out what I'm trying to do over here.
Start to
you
dig
know?
back in.
Just
Okay.
that sort of mid-range.
I mean, you have a
versus
lot of
turbo
catch-up
plan.
mechanics, which is nice.
Yeah.
So you could bowl to a lot of interaction and then hope that turns 3 through 4, your deck just does the thing the deck wants to do,
Yes,
which is draw
absolutely.
back out of it. So I can see that, but yeah, that makes sense. Like, I mean, right? This is no secret. Turbo preys on mid-range, and Stacks preys on turbo, and mid-range has a relatively decent time against Stacks. Like, it can just eventually grind its way through,
Yes.
right? So, I mean, that tracks. But it's helpful to kind of get a good perspective if other people out there are thinking like, well, my local meta has a bunch of turbo, so is this the deck for me? Like that kind of question.
Right.
But if your local meta is chock full of the Atraxes and the TNTs and the Kinnons and the you know, blue farm sort of decks or whatever, like, then I could maybe want to play this, and that makes sense. I guess kind of as a wrapping up, are there any things that you want to mention about the deck that you feel like we didn't touch on?
Not particularly. I will say, stop flashing up Bowmaster in response to my Tamiyo ult. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that's fair.
I will win on top of the triggers.
Yeah, and that is actually so true. It's like someone's like, "Oh, well, I'm holding up this Bowmaster for a Tamiyo ult." You know what can work against the Tamiyo ult, though? Anyways, so as a way to kind of just wrap up, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come out and actually do like an in-person interview. This is the first one of these that we're doing on the channel, and I really love that. And also thanks for, you know, like spending the time and working on this list initially with me, and then picking it up and really championing it yourself, making your own tweaks, your own tuning, and then putting up actual real results with it. I mean, you top forward in the last monthly that we had. So you top forward in a comp REL local tournament that we had where people are coming down from Phoenix and Prescott and all over or whatever, which is sick as fuck. And then also, like we just played this last Thursday, or 2 Thursdays ago,
Thursdays, yeah.
and you took first place above me in our standings. Which is super, super sick. So it's like, I guess what I'm getting at is it's not like a one-off fluke, like you're putting up real results with it.
Yeah.
And obviously you're a good pilot and you understand the format, but there's also the fact that like baby girl, as you like to call her, is actually doing the thing, which I think is super cool to see. Warms my heart because I love brews. I love people who are like willing to take a risk in the format. But I also just think it's super cool because this is like definitely not a really played deck. Like,
Oh, yeah.
there's not even like people out there doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
It's like just, I mean, I'm sure people can look up the numbers, but there's like no real results with this
No,
deck,
yeah.
which is super, super cool. I mean, there's a couple people who've done stuff. I know at one point Ian, comedian MTG, was like talking about a way to brew this list, and obviously Radstorm is a super powerful way to go about this card.
Absolutely.
But these are things that I had also been thinking as well. So I guess the last thing I wanted to just say to you is there anything that you want to shout out to either like socials for you or anything that you want to let the audience at home know before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm not super quite, in the online space as
Sure.
much as you are, but if you want to find me on Moxfield, I do have a few interesting brews on there. It's X Whitesnake.
Yep, we got it on screen right here as well.
I'm in the RAL server as Whitesnake as well.
Cool.
My username on Discord is Black Hat Badger, all one word. And there's not too much else other than that I can really think of. But yeah, it's been great. Appreciate you having me here. Love talking about this deck. I think it has legs, and of course I think it has legs.
Yeah.
I think, if we get a little bit more support for certain proliferate mechanics and such in the future, or this deck can really be a strong contender,
Hell yeah. Awesome. Well, let's get a MH3 Flipwalker high five one time.
Oh yeah, buddy.
Cool. Thanks.